I was 10 when I started forging my dad's signature to keep the lights on after Mom died and he drowned himself in bottles. My teacher finally called CPS when she caught me stealing food, but my Aunt Kim only took me in to get access to Mom's life insurance money. When I found out she was meeting with an illegal adoption agency to sell me, I had to choose between protecting my drunk father or saving myself. The first time I forged Dad's signature, my hands shook so badly I had to practice on 20 sheets of paper first. Mom had been dead for 3 months, and the electricity was about to be shut off. I was 10. I found him passed out on the couch, empty bottles forming a fortress around him. His work badge lay on the coffee table next to a pink slip, warning about his absences. I called his boss. "Hello, Mr. Davidson? This is Lily from Dr. Peterson's office. I'm calling about Michael Pilley." "Yes, he's been seeing the doctor for severe grief complications. The doctor recommends extended bereavement leave." My voice was steady, professional. I'd learned it from watching Mom handle Dad's affairs when he was deployed. Mr. Davidson bought it completely. The checks were easier after that first signature. Bank tellers smiled at the sweet girl helping her daddy. I memorized which grocery stores had lax security, which aisles had blind spots. I became an expert at self-checkout, scanning expensive items as bananas, walking out with just enough to not starve. "Your father must be so proud," Mrs. Patterson said, watching me carry groceries up our walkway. "Such a responsible young lady." I beamed at her. "He says I'm his little helper." She never wondered why a 10-year-old was grocery shopping alone on a school day. At school, I was the perfect student. Straight A's. Never missed homework despite having no one to check it. Teachers praised my maturity, my independence. When they asked about the bruises, I had a repertoire of excuses. Fell off my bike. Tripped during gymnastics. What gymnastics? Ran into a door frame reading while walking. "She's delightfully clumsy," Ms. Hangrit told another teacher laughing. "But so bright. And look how she helps the younger kids during lunch." I helped them because they sometimes didn't finish their sandwiches. The stealing got more sophisticated. I learned which stores prosecuted and which just banned you. I figured out that if you looked clean and spoke well, security guards assumed you were just forgetful, not desperate. I kept Dad's work situation afloat with increasingly elaborate medical excuses. Even learned to mimic different doctors' letterheads. Some nights, Dad would emerge from his stupor, pull me close with breath that burned my nostrils. "You're just like her," he'd slur. "So smart, taking care of everything. My good girl." Those were the nights I went to bed hungry, giving him my hidden stash of peanut butter crackers so he'd have something in his stomach besides vodka. The system was perfect. Everyone saw what they wanted to see. A grieving father doing his best. A mature daughter stepping up. No one wanted to look closer because that would mean doing something about it until Miss Pilley caught me. It wasn't dramatic. She simply asked me to stay after class and close the door. Then she did something no adult had done in months. She asked me real questions. "What's your favorite food, Lily?" "Pasta with butter," I said automatically. Then, because she was still looking at me with those patient eyes, I whispered, "When we have butter." "What do you and your dad like to do together for fun?" I searched for lies and found none. Sometimes when he's sleeping, I sit next to him and tell him about school, so he won't be alone. "What time do you usually go to bed?" "When he stops drinking." The smile never left my face. I'd learned that if you smiled, adults stopped asking questions, but Miss Pilley wasn't stopping. And when I finally looked up at her, I saw something that made my chest tight, tears in her eyes. "Wait here, sweetheart," she said, handing me her phone. "You can play games on this while I go get someone, okay?" 2 hours later, I heard the knock. Ms. Pilley came back with 2 police officers and a woman in a gray suit who introduced herself as being from Family Services. They all had that same look, like they were trying to smile, but their faces wouldn't cooperate. "We're going to take a ride to your house," the woman said. "We need to check on your dad." My body went cold. "No, he's sleeping. He needs to sleep off the grief medicine." But they were already walking me to the car. I tried to run, but Officer Kim caught me gently. "It's okay," she said. "We're going to help." "You don't understand," I screamed. "I have to call his work tomorrow. I have to deposit the check. There's no food and he doesn't know where I hide the money and—" "Shh," the woman said. "That's not your job, honey." When we got home, Dad didn't answer. The police said they needed to do a wellness check. I begged them to leave him alone. Told them he just needed rest. Promised I'd take better care of him. "Please," I sobbed. "I'll be better. I won't let the food run out again. I'll forge the checks better. I promise." The woman's face crumpled. She nodded to the officers. When they opened Dad's bedroom door, the smell hit me first. Stale alcohol, unwashed clothes, and something else. Something that made the officers immediately push me back. "Call EMS," one said urgently. "Now. DAD." I fought against the arms holding me. "Dad, wake up. I'm sorry. I'll get more food. I'll fix it." But as the paramedics rushed past me, as I heard words like unresponsive and possible alcohol poisoning, I realized my careful system hadn't been protecting him. It had been hiding him while he died. The social worker held me as I screamed, my responsible voice finally shattering into what it really was. A terrified child who'd been drowning for months. "He needs me," I kept saying. "Who's going to take care of him?" "The doctors will," she promised. "And someone's going to take care of you now too." As they wheeled him out on a stretcher, oxygen mask on his gray face, I saw our house clearly for the first time in months. Empty bottles everywhere. Forged checks scattered on the table. My practice signatures. The stolen food in the cabinets. Evidence of a 10-year-old trying to hold up an entire world. Is he going to die? I watched the paramedics work on Dad through the ambulance doors until they slammed shut. The social worker kept her arms around me, but I felt nothing. My body had gone numb, like when you sit wrong and your leg falls asleep, except it was everything. The gray-suited woman introduced herself again. "Mrs. Chen," she said. "Child Protective Services." She guided me to her car while the police officers stayed behind to document our house. I pressed my face against the window, watching our home get smaller. They'd find everything. All my lies laid out like evidence. At the hospital, Mrs. Chen led me through bright hallways that smelled like bleach and sadness. We sat in a waiting room with uncomfortable plastic chairs. She bought me a juice box from a vending machine, but my hands shook too much to open it. A doctor came out after what felt like hours. He knelt down to my level, which meant bad news. Adults only did that when they were about to say something terrible. "Your dad is very sick," he said gently, "but we're helping him. He's going to need to stay here for a while." "How long?" The doctor glanced at Mrs. Chen. "At least a few weeks, maybe longer." My chest felt hollow. Who would take care of the bills? Who would answer when his work called? My brain started calculating, planning, until Mrs. Chen's hand on my shoulder stopped me. "Lily, we need to find somewhere safe for you to stay while your dad gets better. I can stay home. I know how to take care of myself." "That's not an option, sweetheart." The next few hours blurred together. Phone calls, paperwork, adults talking over my head using words like emergency placement and kinship care. Mrs. Chen asked me about relatives. Did I have grandparents, aunts, or uncles? "My mom's sister," I whispered. "Aunt Kim, but she lives in California." More phone calls. I dozed off in the uncomfortable chair, waking when Mrs. Chen gently shook my shoulder. "Good news. Your Aunt Kim is flying out tonight. She'll be here tomorrow morning." I tried to remember the last time I'd seen Aunt Kim. Mom's funeral, maybe. She'd worn too much perfume and cried louder than anyone else, even though Mom once told me they hadn't spoken in years. Mrs. Chen drove me to something called an emergency foster home for the night. The house smelled like potpourri and cats. The foster mom, Mrs. Rodriguez, had kind eyes but too many questions. I gave her my practice smile and told her I was fine, just tired. She showed me to a bedroom with 2 twin beds. Another girl, maybe 13, sat on one of them, earbuds in, ignoring me completely. Fine by me. I didn't want to talk either. I lay in the strange bed, staring at the ceiling. Somewhere across town, Dad was hooked up to machines, getting the help I couldn't give him. The thought should have made me feel better. Instead, guilt pressed down on my chest like a weight. Wait. Mrs. Rodriguez knocked softly and came in with a sandwich and milk. I hadn't eaten since yesterday's stolen granola bar, but my stomach felt too twisted to accept food. Just leave it on the nightstand, she said gently. Sometimes it helps to have something there when you're ready. After she left, I forced myself to eat half the sandwich. I needed strength for whatever came next. The other girl had fallen asleep, snoring softly. I envied her ability to just exist without planning the next move. Morning came too fast. Mrs. Chen picked me up early, and we drove back to the hospital. My aunt was already there, standing in the lobby. She looked older than I remembered, with Mom's same dark hair but cut short and styled perfectly. Her clothes looked expensive. "Oh, Lily!" She rushed over, pulling me into a hug that smelled like that same overpowering perfume. "You poor thing. I can't believe Michael let things get this bad." Something in her tone made my skin prickle. Mrs. Chen must have noticed my tension because she suggested we sit down to talk. Aunt Kim dominated the conversation, telling Mrs. Chen how she'd been worried about us since the funeral, how she tried to stay in touch, but Michael had pushed everyone away. Lies. Mom told me once that Kim only called when she needed money. "Of course I'll take her," Aunt Kim said, squeezing my hand too tight. "Family takes care of family. I've already talked to my husband. We have plenty of room." Mrs. Chen explained the process. Temporary guardianship papers, home inspection, background checks. Aunt Kim nodded along, playing the part of the concerned relative perfectly, but I caught her checking her phone when she thought no one was looking, frowning at whatever she saw. They let me see Dad before we left. He was awake but groggy, hooked to IVs and monitors. His skin had a yellow tint that made my stomach turn. "Hey, kiddo," he whispered. I wanted to apologize, to promise I'd do better, to beg him to get well so we could go home. Instead, I just held his hand. "This is my fault," he said, tears sliding down his cheeks. "I'm so sorry, Lily. You shouldn't have had to. It's okay, Dad. Your aunt's going to take care of you for a while." I nodded, not trusting my voice. "You be good for her, okay? And keep up those grades. Your mom would be so proud of how smart you are." Aunt Kim appeared in the doorway. "We should go, sweetie. Let your dad rest." Dad squeezed my hand one more time before letting go. As Aunt Kim led me away, I heard him whisper, just like her mother, "Too smart for her own good." The drive to collect my things felt surreal. Our house looked different in daylight, smaller and shabbier. Police tape covered the door, but Mrs. Chen had a key. Aunt Kim waited in the car, saying the smell of cigarettes made her nauseous. Dad didn't smoke. I packed quickly, grabbing clothes and my school books. Hidden in my closet, I found the envelope where I kept the emergency cash. $43. Oh man. Aunt Kim showing up with that same perfume from the funeral. What is wrong with her? And poor Lily counting that $43 like it's her retirement fund while her aunt waits outside because of the cigarette smell in a house where nobody smokes. I slipped it into my backpack when Mrs. Chen wasn't looking. "Is this your mom's?" Mrs. Chen held up a small photo album I'd hidden under my mattress. I nodded, taking it carefully. Inside were pictures from before, when Mom was healthy and Dad smiled without alcohol on his breath. Aunt Kim wasn't in any of them. Back in the car, Aunt Kim chattered about her house in the suburbs, her husband Robert, who worked in finance, how I'd love my new school. Her words washed over me like white noise. I studied her in the rearview mirror, noticing how her smile never reached her eyes. We stopped at a restaurant for lunch. Aunt Kim ordered a salad and picked at it while scrolling through her phone. I ordered soup, something easy on my nervous stomach. "So," she said suddenly, putting her phone down, "your dad must have some sort of life insurance from your mom, right? Or survivor benefits?" My spine straightened. "I don't know." "Well, we'll need to look into that. For your care, you understand. Kids are expensive." She laughed, but it sounded forced. "Robert's going to have questions about the finances." Warning bells rang in my head. I'd learned to read people over the past months, to know who meant harm and who just didn't care. Aunt Kim was definitely the first type. "Mrs. Chen handles all that stuff," I lied smoothly. Aunt Kim's mouth tightened. "Of course. Well, we'll sort it all out once you're settled." The rest of the drive, she asked seemingly innocent questions. Did Dad have a safety deposit box? Did I know where he kept important papers? Had anyone from his work contacted me about benefits? I played dumb, giving vague answers and pretending to be more interested in the view outside, but my mind raced. She wanted something. Money, probably. Mom once said Kim had expensive tastes and a gambling problem. Her house was exactly what I expected. Big, pristine, and cold. Everything was white or beige, like a magazine spread. Robert wasn't home yet, she explained, leading me upstairs to a guest room. "This will be yours," she said. "The bathroom is across the hall. Don't touch anything in the medicine cabinet." The room was nice enough, with a real bed and clean sheets, but it felt like a hotel, not a home. I set my backpack down carefully, already planning where to hide my cash. "Get settled in," Aunt Kim said. "We'll go shopping tomorrow for some appropriate clothes." She eyed my thrift store jeans with distaste before leaving me alone. I sat on the bed, overwhelmed by the silence. No bottles clinking, no slurred words through thin walls, just quiet. It should have been peaceful, but it felt wrong. My phone buzzed. Mrs. Chen, checking in. I texted back that I was fine, knowing she had dozens of other kids to worry about. Then I did what I'd been doing for months. I made a plan. Aunt Kim wanted money. She'd taken me in, hoping to get access to whatever benefits or insurance might exist. I needed to figure out what she was after and stay one step ahead. Just like with the grocery stores and the forged checks, I'd learn the system and work it. Because one thing was clear. Aunt Kim might be family, but she wasn't safe. And I'd learned the hard way that the only person I could really count on was myself. That night at dinner, I met Robert. He was older than Aunt Kim, with gray hair and cold eyes that reminded me of a fish. He barely looked at me, focusing instead on complaining about his day at work. "So this is temporary, right?" he asked Aunt Kim, like I wasn't sitting right there. "Of course," she assured him, "just until her father is back on his feet." They exchanged a look I couldn't interpret. But when Aunt Kim served dessert, she asked again about Dad's paperwork, his bank accounts, whether he had a will. "I really don't know," I insisted, perfecting my confused little girl act. "Dad handled all that stuff," Robert snorted. "Handled it right into a bottle from what I hear." "Robert!" Aunt Kim scolded, but her heart wasn't in it. I excused myself, claiming homework. In my room, I pulled out the photo album and looked at pictures of Mom. She smiled back at me, frozen in happier times. I wondered what she'd think of all this. Probably she'd tell me to be smart, be careful, and protect myself, so that's what I'd do. The next morning brought the first real test. Aunt Kim woke me early, her perfume already overwhelming in the morning air. She held out a piece of paper and a pen, her smile too bright for 7 in the morning. I recognized the form immediately, a release for medical records. My stomach tightened as I read through it, seeing Dad's name at the top. Aunt Kim explained that she needed access to Dad's medical information to properly care for me. Her reasoning sounded logical, but I caught the way her fingers drummed against her leg, the same nervous habit Mom used to have when she was lying. I took the pen and carefully signed my name in the wrong spot, making the form invalid. Aunt Kim's face twitched, but she maintained her smile and said we'd try again later. At breakfast, Robert barely acknowledged my presence. He read his tablet while eating toast, occasionally grunting at something Aunt Kim said. She served me cereal in a bowl that probably cost more than our entire dish set at home. The doorbell rang just as I finished eating. Mrs. Chen stood on the porch with her briefcase and kind smile. She'd come for the home inspection, she explained, part of the temporary guardianship process. Aunt Kim transformed into the perfect hostess, guiding Mrs. Chen through the house while pointing out all the amenities. The spare bathroom just for me, the desk where I could do homework, the backyard where I could play. I trailed behind them, watching Mrs. Chen take notes. She asked about my school enrollment, and Aunt Kim produced a folder full of paperwork she'd already started. Everything looked perfect on paper. Mrs. Chen asked to speak with me privately. Aunt Kim's jaw tightened, but she agreed, suggesting they use the living room while she prepared coffee in the kitchen. Alone with Mrs. Chen, I wanted to tell her everything about the medical forms, about the questions about money, about the way Robert looked at me like I was a problem to solve. But I'd learned that adults needed proof, not just feelings. Mrs. Chen asked how I was settling in. I gave her the right answers, the ones that would keep things stable while I figured out my next move. She seemed satisfied, though she studied my face carefully before we finished. After she left, Aunt Kim's mask slipped. She complained to Robert about the invasiveness of the system, about how they were doing a good deed and being treated like criminals. Robert just grunted and went back to his tablet. That afternoon, Aunt Kim took me shopping as promised. But instead of the mall, we went to a thrift store. She bought me 3 outfits, all slightly too big, and told me I'd grow into them. The total came to less than what she'd spent on lunch the day before. On the drive back, she tried again. This time, it was about Dad's employer. Did I know if he had a pension? Death benefits from Mom's passing? She'd been thinking, she said, about how to best provide for my future. I pretended to fall asleep in the car, letting my head loll against the window. Through barely opened eyes, I watched her face in the mirror. The frustration was clear now, her lips pressed into a thin line. At the house, I overheard her on the phone in the kitchen. She was talking to someone about power of attorney, about what rights she had as a temporary guardian. The person on the other end must have given her bad news because she slammed a cabinet door hard enough to rattle the dishes. That evening, while Aunt Kim and Robert watched TV, I explored the house more carefully. In the home office, I found bills marked past due, stuffed in a drawer, credit card statements with balances that made my eyes widen. A notice from Robert's employer about mandatory retirement. The picture became clearer. They needed money, and they thought I was their ticket to it. I slipped back to my room before they noticed I was gone. Under my mattress, I hid the $43 in a sock. It wasn't much, but it was mine. School started 3 days later. Aunt Kim drove me, complaining the whole way about the early morning traffic and how the public school was farther than she thought. She'd wanted to enroll me in the local private school, she said, but the tuition was astronomical. The new school was bigger than my old one, with kids who wore designer backpacks and talked about their weekend trips. I kept my head down and found my classroom without help. My new teacher, Ms. Sebastian, introduced me to the class. 25 faces stared at me, evaluating the girl in the 2 big thrift store clothes. I smiled my practice smile and took the empty seat in the back. At lunch, I sat alone, observing. The cafeteria dynamics were different here. Clear social hierarchies based on clothes and gadgets. I missed my old school, where being smart was enough to fit in. A girl named Ailey approached me after a few days. She was friendly enough, asking about where I'd moved from and why. I kept my answers vague, saying my dad was sick and I was staying with family. She seemed satisfied and invited me to sit with her group. The routine at Aunt Kim's house settled into a pattern. She'd try new approaches to get information about Dad's finances. I'd deflect or play dumb. Robert would ignore both of us. The tension grew thicker each day. One evening, Aunt Kim announced we were visiting Dad that weekend. My heart leaped and sank as she explained she needed him to sign some papers. Just formalities, she assured me. Things to make sure I was properly cared for. I knew better. Whatever papers she had weren't for my benefit. At school, I threw myself into academics. It was familiar territory where I could excel without money or the right clothes. Ms. Sebastian noticed my dedication and started giving me extra assignments, advanced work that challenged me. During library time, I researched. I learned about temporary guardianship, about children's rights, about what Aunt Kim could and couldn't do legally. Knowledge was power, and I needed all I could get. The visit to Dad came on Saturday. He looked better, though still pale and thin. His hands shook slightly as he hugged me, but his eyes were clear. The yellow tinge had faded. Aunt Kim gave us a few minutes alone before producing her papers. She chatted about how well I was doing, how the house was perfect for raising a child, how she and Robert were happy to help family. Then came the forms. She placed them in front of Dad with a pen, explaining they were routine guardianship papers. Just until he was better, of course. I watched Dad's face as he read. His forehead creased, and he looked up at Aunt Kim with confusion. These weren't guardianship papers. They were documents giving her access to any insurance settlements, beneficiary rights, and control over my future finances. Dad's hand trembled as he set down the pen unsigned. He told Aunt Kim he needed to think about it, maybe have a lawyer look it over. Her face went rigid, but she forced a smile and said, of course, there was no rush. The drive home was silent. Aunt Kim's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. At a red light, she turned to me with eyes that reminded me of a snake. She asked if I'd said something to Dad. I shook my head, maintaining my innocent expression. But inside, I felt a small victory. Dad might be sick, but he wasn't stupid. That night, I heard Aunt Kim and Robert arguing. Their voices carried through the thin walls, though I couldn't make out all the words. Something about time running out, about bills, about needing to be smarter. Sunday brought a new tactic. Aunt Kim suddenly became the perfect guardian. She made pancakes for breakfast, asked about my homework, even suggested we go to the park. I played along, wary of the sudden change. At the park, she pushed me on the swings like Mom used to. For a moment, I almost believed she cared. Then she started talking about how hard it was to raise a child, how expensive everything was, how she was doing her best with limited resources. The manipulation was more subtle now, but still there. She was setting up for something. Monday at school, Ms. Sebastian asked me to stay after class. She'd noticed I'd been tired, distracted. Was everything okay at home? I wanted to tell her everything, but what would I say? That my aunt was after money that might not even exist, that I felt like a prize to be won rather than a child to be cared for? Instead, I told her I was just adjusting to the new environment. She didn't look convinced, but let it go. As I left, she handed me a card with her cell phone number, just in case I needed to talk, she said. That afternoon, Aunt Kim was on the phone again when I got home, this time with a lawyer, discussing something about emergency custody versus temporary guardianship, about expediting paperwork, about Dad's mental competency. My blood ran cold. She was trying to make the arrangement permanent. I crept to my room and pulled out the prepaid phone Mrs. Chen had given me for emergencies. Her number was programmed in, but I hesitated. What if calling her made things worse? What if they moved me somewhere even worse than here? But then I thought about Dad, getting stronger every day, only to have Aunt Kim try to declare him unfit. I thought about Mom, who'd warned me about Kim's true nature. I thought about myself, becoming a pawn in someone else's game. I didn't call, not yet, but I started documenting everything. Every conversation about money, every form she tried to get signed, every bill I found showing their financial desperation. I took pictures with the phone and hid it in the lining of my backpack. Tuesday brought another surprise. A man in a suit came to the door, introducing himself as a social worker doing a follow-up visit. But something was off. His credentials looked different from Mrs. Chen's, and he seemed more interested in Dad's condition than mine. Aunt Kim chatted with him like old friends, which raised more red flags. Real social workers didn't usually get that friendly that fast. I excused myself to use the bathroom and quickly texted Mrs. Chen, asking if she'd sent someone. Her response came quickly. No, and I should be careful. She was on her way. I returned to find the man asking Aunt Kim about Dad's history, about his drinking, about whether she thought he'd ever be fit to parent again. Aunt Kim shook her head sadly, painting a picture of a man too broken to recover. The doorbell rang before she could finish. Mrs. Chen stood there with another official-looking person. The man in the suit suddenly needed to leave, muttering about a miscommunication. Aunt Kim's face cycled through several emotions before settling on confused innocence. Mrs. Chen asked to speak with me alone. This time, I told her more. Not everything, but enough. About the forms, about the lawyer calls, about the strange visitor. She took notes, her face growing more concerned with each detail. She told me to call her immediately if anything else happened, that she'd be checking in more frequently, that my safety was the priority. After she left, Aunt Kim was furious. She accused me of making her look bad, of being ungrateful. Robert told her to calm down, but his eyes were cold as they looked at me. I'd become more trouble than I was worth. The next few days were tense. Aunt Kim barely spoke to me, and Robert acted like I didn't exist. I spent most of my time in my room, doing homework and planning. At school, I confided in Ms. Sebastian. Not everything, but enough that she understood I was in a difficult situation. She promised to be available if I needed help and gave me a journal to write in. Sometimes it helps to get thoughts on paper, she said. Friday came with another visit to Dad scheduled. This time, Aunt Kim said Robert would take me. She had an important appointment she couldn't miss. Robert drove in silence, the radio playing classical music. At the hospital, he waited in the lobby while I went up to Dad's room. Dad looked even better. He was sitting up, color returned to his face. He told me about his treatment, about the therapy sessions, about how he was determined to get better for me. Then he told me something that made my heart sink. Aunt Kim had been calling the hospital, trying to get information about his progress. She'd even tried to have herself listed as his emergency contact, claiming it was for my benefit. But the hospital had rules. Without proper documentation, she couldn't access his records or make decisions about his care. It was a small protection, but an important one. Dad held my hand and promised he was fighting to come home, to be the father I deserved. He asked about Aunt Kim, and I could see he already knew the answer from my face. The drive back with Robert was different. He actually spoke, telling me that I was making things difficult, that Aunt Kim was trying to help, that if I would just cooperate, everyone's lives would be easier. I stared out the window and didn't respond. I'd learned that sometimes silence was the best defense. That weekend, Aunt Kim tried a new approach. She brought out photo albums from when she and Mom were young. She told stories about their childhood, trying to create a connection between us. Some of the stories were even true. I recognized them from things Mom had told me. But Aunt Kim's versions were different, always painting herself in a better light. She showed me pictures of Mom I'd never seen. Mom as a teenager, Mom at her high school graduation, Mom at her wedding, with Aunt Kim notably absent. So Aunt Kim's going from mean aunt to Mary Poppins with the pancakes and swings. Nice try, lady. But that speech about how expensive kids are while pushing a swing is like trying to sell someone a car while slashing the tires. When I asked why she wasn't there, Aunt Kim's story didn't match what Mom had told me. Sunday night, I overheard another argument, this time about me directly. Robert wanted to send me back to foster care, said I was too much trouble, too smart for my own good. Aunt Kim argued they were too close to give up now, that Dad would break eventually, that there had to be money somewhere. I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling. 3 weeks at Aunt Kim's house felt like 3 months. Every day was a battle, every conversation a minefield. At school on Monday, something felt different. Ailey and her friends were whispering, looking at me strangely. At lunch, I found out why. Someone had seen me at the thrift store with Aunt Kim, had heard her complaining about the cost of taking care of her sister's kid. The story had spread, twisted in the telling. Now, I was the poor relation, the charity case. I could have corrected them, could have explained that Aunt Kim had money, just didn't want to spend it on me. But I'd learned that sometimes the truth made things worse. Ms. Sebastian noticed my isolation and started eating lunch in her classroom, inviting any student who wanted a quiet place to read. I became a regular, grateful for the escape. Tuesday brought another attempt from Aunt Kim. This time, she'd found a therapist who specialized in grief counseling for children. She presented it as caring about my mental health, but I caught the therapist's name and looked her up later. She specialized in determining parental fitness and testifying in custody cases and helping establish permanent guardianship arrangements. Everything was a chess move with Aunt Kim. I agreed to go, knowing refusal would look bad, but I also knew how to play the game, how to say the right things without giving her ammunition against Dad. The first session was exactly what I expected. Questions about Dad's drinking, about how I'd felt taking care of him, about whether I felt safe with him. I talked about how much I missed him, how he was getting better, how I couldn't wait to go home. I painted a picture of a father who'd struggled but was fighting to recover, every word calculated to protect him. The therapist took notes, her face neutral. Aunt Kim waited in the lobby, all concerned guardian on the surface, but I saw her checking her phone constantly, probably waiting for the therapist's initial assessment. That night, I made a decision. I called Mrs. Chen from the bathroom, shower running to mask my voice. I told her I needed to see her, that things were escalating, that I was scared of what Aunt Kim might do next. She promised to come by the school the next day to figure out options, to make sure I was safe. Wednesday morning, Aunt Kim was almost cheerful. She hummed while making breakfast, complimented my hair, even offered to drive me to school early if I wanted extra study time. The change made me more nervous than her anger had. At school, Mrs. Chen met with me during lunch. We sat in the counselor's office, door closed for privacy. I showed her the photos I'd taken, told her about the therapist, about the man who'd pretended to be a social worker. Her face grew more serious with each revelation. She asked if I felt unsafe. I thought about it carefully. Aunt Kim hadn't hurt me physically, but the psychological warfare was exhausting. Mrs. Chen explained my options. Emergency removal was possible, but would mean another foster placement. Or we could document everything and build a case for Dad's recovery and return to custody. I chose documentation. I could handle Aunt Kim for a while longer if it meant going home eventually. Mrs. Chen gave me a notebook to record everything. Dates, times, conversations. She also gave me a new emergency phone, one Aunt Kim didn't know about. The number was programmed with her direct line and a crisis hotline. After school, Aunt Kim picked me up with news. We were going to see a lawyer tomorrow, just to make sure all the paperwork was in order, she said, to protect my interests. I knew better. This was her big move. That night, I barely slept. I ran through scenarios, planned responses, tried to anticipate every angle. The notebook Mrs. Chen gave me was already filling with observations and evidence. Thursday came too quickly. Aunt Kim dressed me in my best thrift store outfit and reminded me to be polite to the lawyer, to answer his questions honestly, to remember that she was doing this for me. The lawyer's office was in a building that had seen better days. The elevator creaked, and the hallway smelled like old carpet, not exactly the high-powered attorney I'd expected. The lawyer, Mr. Benjamin, was younger than I'd anticipated. He greeted Aunt Kim warmly, which told me they'd spoken before, maybe many times. He explained that he was there to help ensure my best interests were protected, that sometimes when a parent was ill, it was better to have stable, permanent guardianship. He made it sound reasonable, even kind. Then came the questions, about Dad's drinking, about how long it had been going on, about whether I'd ever felt scared or unsafe. I recognized the trap. Every question designed to build a case against Dad. I played confused, asked what this had to do with Dad getting better, wondered aloud when I could go home. I turned every question back to Dad's recovery, to how much better he was doing. Mr. Benjamin's smile grew tighter with each deflection. Aunt Kim jumped in, trying to lead me to the right answers, but I'd learned from the best manipulator I knew, her. Finally, Mr. Benjamin produced documents, permanent guardianship papers. He explained that Aunt Kim would become my legal guardian, able to make all decisions about my life, including financial ones. There it was, the end game. I asked to read them, all of them. Mr. Benjamin looked annoyed, but couldn't really refuse. As I read, I memorized key phrases, legal terms I'd need to research later. Buried in the paperwork was what Aunt Kim really wanted: access to any trust funds, control over insurance payouts, the ability to make claims on my behalf. I looked up at Aunt Kim with wide, innocent eyes and asked why she needed all this. Wasn't Dad coming home soon? Her mask slipped for just a moment. I saw frustration, maybe even hatred, flash across her face. Then the concerned aunt was back, explaining that we needed to be prepared for anything. I nodded like I understood and asked if I could think about it. Maybe talk to Dad first? Mr. Benjamin said that wasn't necessary, that I was too young to really understand these things. That's when I played my card. I mentioned Mrs. Chen, how she'd said any big decisions needed to go through her, how she'd want to review any legal documents. The room went cold. Aunt Kim's jaw clenched. Mr. Benjamin suddenly had another appointment. The drive home was silent until we were 3 blocks from the house. Then Aunt Kim pulled over. She turned to me with eyes that made my stomach drop. She explained that I was making things very difficult, that she was trying to help, that if I didn't cooperate, things could get much worse for everyone, including Dad. It wasn't a direct threat, but close enough. I nodded and said I understood, but inside, I was done playing defense. That night, I used the emergency phone to call Mrs. Chen, told her about the lawyer, about the papers, about the threat. She said she was calling her supervisor, that things were escalating beyond normal family dynamics. Friday at school, I gave Ms. Sebastian Sebastian a sealed envelope. Inside was a letter explaining everything. If something happened to me, I wanted someone to know the truth. She looked concerned, but promised to keep it safe. Then she did something unexpected. She hugged me, told me I was brave, that things would get better. I wanted to believe her. The weekend brought a surprise. Dad called the house. Aunt Kim's face went through several expressions before handing me the phone. Dad's voice was stronger. He told me about his progress, about the apartment he was looking at for when he got out, about the job his old boss was holding for him. Then he asked about the lawyer visit. Someone from the hospital had called him, warned him about what Aunt Kim might be planning. I couldn't say much with her listening, but I managed to convey that I was okay, that I was being careful, that I loved him. After I hung up, Aunt Kim was furious. She accused me of turning Dad against her, of ruining her attempts to help. Robert told her to keep her voice down, but she was beyond caring. That's when she said it. If I didn't cooperate, she'd make sure Dad never got custody back. She had connections, people who owed her favors. She'd paint him as an unfit hammered who'd endangered his child. The threat hung in the air between us. I stared at her, memorizing every word for my documentation. Then I smiled. The same smile I'd used on teachers and store clerks and everyone who'd never looked close enough to see the truth. And I told her I understood. But understanding and complying were two different things. That night, I lay awake planning. The emergency phone hidden in my pillowcase felt like a lifeline. I reviewed everything I'd documented, every piece of evidence I'd collected. By morning, I knew what I had to do. Aunt Kim barely spoke at breakfast. Robert read his tablet while I ate cereal in silence. The tension felt like a physical weight pressing down on all of us. When Aunt Kim left for her Saturday errands, I seized my chance. I slipped into the home office while Robert watched TV. The filing cabinet wasn't even locked. Inside, I found more than I'd expected. Bank statements showing their mounting debt, correspondence with multiple lawyers about bankruptcy options. Most damning, a folder labeled with my name containing research on survivor benefits, social security payments, and potential insurance payouts from Mom's death. My hands shook as I photographed each document with the emergency phone. The evidence painted a clear picture. They'd taken me in hoping for a financial windfall that didn't exist. Their desperation had grown with each passing week, pushing them to more extreme measures. A car door slammed outside. I quickly returned everything to its place and hurried back to my room. Aunt Kim's heels clicked on the hardwood as she entered, calling for Robert. Their muffled conversation drifted through the walls, something about meeting with another lawyer on Monday. That afternoon, Aunt Kim announced we were going shopping again. Not to the thrift store this time, but to a department store. She bought me 2 new outfits, name brand, spending more than she had on all my previous clothes combined. The sudden generosity made my skin crawl. At the register, she made sure to mention loudly how expensive children were, how she was doing her best despite the financial strain. The cashier smiled sympathetically. I recognized the performance for what it was, creating witnesses to her supposed sacrifice. On the drive home, she tried a different approach. She talked about stability, about how I needed a permanent home, about how Dad might never fully recover. Her voice dripped with false concern as she painted a picture of a future where I'd be shuffled between foster homes if she didn't step in. I stared out the window, counting mailboxes, refusing to engage. My silence seemed to frustrate her more than any argument would have. Sunday brought an unexpected visitor. A woman appeared at the door claiming to be from a private adoption agency. Aunt Kim seemed surprised but invited her in. I watched from the stairs as they talked in hushed tones about options for older children, about families looking to adopt, about financial assistance available. My blood turned to ice. This was a new low, even for Aunt Kim. I crept back to my room and immediately texted Mrs. Chen. Within minutes, she called back. Oh man, Aunt Kim's really going for the Villain of the Year award here. First, she tries the "I'm buying you nice clothes" trick like that's gonna make everything okay. Then surprise, surprise, an adoption lady just happens to show up at the door on a Sunday. What a coincidence. I whispered the situation from my closet, the clothes muffling my voice. Mrs. Chen's response was swift. She'd be there within the hour with her supervisor. I should pack my essential belongings, just in case. My hands trembled as I gathered my few possessions, the photo album of Mom, my hidden money, the documentation I'd been keeping. 40 minutes later, 2 cars pulled up. Mrs. Chen emerged from one with a stern-looking woman in a navy suit. From the other came 2 police officers. Aunt Kim's face went white when she answered the door. The adoption agency woman tried to slip out during the confusion, but one of the officers stopped her. It turned out she wasn't from any legitimate agency. Aunt Kim had found her through questionable channels, someone who specialized in difficult placements for a fee. The house erupted in controlled chaos. Mrs. Chen's supervisor took charge, directing the officers to secure certain documents while Mrs. Chen gathered my belongings. Aunt Kim alternated between indignation and tears, claiming she was being persecuted for trying to help. Robert emerged from his study, saw the police, and immediately distanced himself from the situation. He claimed ignorance of Aunt Kim's schemes, though the officers seemed skeptical. I watched it all from the landing, my packed backpack clutched to my chest. Mrs. Chen found me there and gently guided me to her car. As we pulled away, I saw Aunt Kim arguing with the officers on her perfect front lawn, her carefully constructed image crumbling before the neighbors' watching eyes. The emergency foster home was different this time. An older couple, the Nguyens, who specialized in short-term placements during family crises. Their house smelled like cinnamon and fresh bread. Mrs. Nguyen showed me to a small but clean room, telling me to take my time settling in. That evening, Mrs. Chen returned with updates. The woman from the fake adoption agency was being charged with fraud. Aunt Kim was under investigation for attempted trafficking, though proving intent would be difficult. More importantly, Dad's medical team had been informed of the situation and were expediting his treatment plan. I spent the next days in a strange limbo. The Nguyens were kind but maintained professional distance. I attended my old school, Mrs. Sebastian having arranged the transfer back. My former classmates welcomed me with curious looks, but no questions. During this time, I had supervised calls with Dad. His voice grew stronger each time. He told me about his progress, about the apartment he'd secured, about the job waiting for him. The social workers were impressed with his dedication to recovery. 2 weeks passed before the next meeting. A case conference, Mrs. Chen called it. I sat at a long table surrounded by adults, social workers, Dad's treatment team, a child advocate. Even Ms. Sebastian had come to support me. Dad appeared on a video call from the treatment center, looking healthier than I'd seen him in months. They discussed my future in careful, measured terms. Foster care versus kinship placement. Dad's progress versus the time needed for full recovery. My educational needs and emotional well-being. I listened, understanding that my fate was being decided by committee. Then the child advocate asked what I wanted. The room fell silent. I took a breath and spoke clearly about wanting to go home, but only when Dad was truly ready. About needing stability, but also needing my father. About understanding that recovery took time, but believing in second chances. The committee deliberated. In the end, they proposed a gradual reunification plan. Dad would complete his treatment, then we'd have supervised visits, overnight stays, and eventually, if all went well, I'd return home. The Nguyens agreed to keep me until then, providing the stability I needed. Dad cried on the video call. Happy tears this time. He promised to do whatever it took, to attend every meeting, every therapy session, every parenting class they required. I believed him. The next months fell into a routine. School during the week, where I excelled academically and slowly rebuilt friendships. Supervised visits with Dad on weekends, watching him grow stronger and more like the father I remembered from before Mom died. The visits gradually became longer, less supervised, more natural. Aunt Kim's legal troubles continued in the background. She'd avoided trafficking charges but faced fraud allegations. Her marriage to Robert crumbled under the strain. I heard through Mrs. Chen that she'd left the state, chasing another scheme in another place. I felt no satisfaction satisfaction, only relief that she was gone. Dad's apartment was small but clean. He decorated my room with photos of our family from happier times. During our first overnight visit, he cooked dinner, badly, and we laughed at his attempts. It felt like learning to be a family again. The final court hearing came 6 months after that awful night at Aunt Kim's. Dad wore his only suit, freshly pressed. I sat beside him as the judge reviewed our case. Dad's compliance with treatment, his stable employment, his dedication to rebuilding our life together. The judge's decision was cautious, but hopeful. Custody restored with continued check-ins from social services, mandatory therapy for both of us, regular substance testing for Dad, conditions that felt less like restrictions and more like safety nets. We walked out of the courthouse hand in hand. No dramatic celebration, no perfect ending. Just a father and daughter facing an uncertain but hopeful future. Dad's hand shook slightly. It always would, but his grip was firm. The apartment felt different that night, knowing it was really home. Dad tucked me in for the first time in over a year, both of us pretending I wasn't too old for it. We didn't talk about the future or make grand promises. We just existed in that moment, grateful for second chances. I kept the emergency phone Mrs. Chen had given me, tucked in my nightstand drawer, a reminder of how quickly life could change, how important it was to ask for help. Dad kept his meeting schedule taped to the refrigerator, checking off each day of sobriety with quiet pride. School continued. Ms. Sebastian remained a steady presence, checking in without prying. I joined the academic team, finding friends who valued intelligence over designer labels. Life developed a new normal that felt both foreign and familiar. Dad and I learned to navigate our new reality together. He attended parent-teacher conferences sober and alert. I stopped hiding money and food, trusting that the lights would stay on and the refrigerator would stay full. We both attended therapy, separately and together, unpacking the trauma of our loss and its aftermath. The system that had saved us gradually faded into the background. Social worker visits became less frequent, then stopped altogether. The emergency numbers remained programmed in my phone but unused. We'd proven ourselves capable of moving forward. Some nights were harder than others. Dad would stare at Mom's photo with tears in his eyes. I'd wake from nightmares about forged signatures and empty bottles. But morning always came, bringing school and work and the simple routines that held us together. I never forgot the skills I'd learned during those desperate months. The ability to read people, to plan ahead, to survive. But I no longer needed them for daily survival. They became tools tucked away, hopefully never to be used again. Dad marked 1 year of sobriety with a quiet dinner at home. No fanfare, just acknowledgement of how far we'd come. He gave me a card with shaky handwriting that said simply, "Thank you for not giving up on me." I gave him a photo of us at the park, both smiling genuine smiles. Life wasn't perfect. Dad still struggled some days. I still carried the weight of having been a parentified child. But we faced these challenges together, with support systems in place and hope for better days. The past couldn't be erased, but it no longer defined our entire future. Our story didn't end with dramatic revelations or perfect justice. It ended with quiet healing, slow progress, and the simple victory of a family rebuilt from broken pieces. Not a fairy tale ending, but a real one. And that was enough. Ending with, not a fairy tale ending, but honestly, this is better than any fairy tale where someone just waves a magic wand and poof, everything's perfect. Because real life means Dad's checking off sobriety days on the fridge calendar, and they're both in therapy working through the hard stuff like actual people do. Well, folks, this story took us from forged signatures to family dinners and showed us that sometimes the best endings are the quiet ones where people just keep trying every day.